Hi, I'm Al Adamson. I'm here with Cavanaugh of Patagonia. Caitlin, your title, Talent Analytics Lead, is that right? So we're here in Lincoln Hall, Pritzker School of Law on the campus of Northwestern University. Pleasure having you.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for the time to talk.
Now, we were laughing about the title. Can you just jump right in and what your philosophy is at Patagonia on titles and why that might be important?
Yeah, I mean, it's a joke, but not a joke. We are in the process of rethinking how we describe our work. And a huge driver of that is this reality that some of the hierarchy language that's been baked into job titles is getting in the way of us truly living and working in alignment with our values. So my job title, officially being Talent Analytics Lead, is actually something I don't lead with. When people ask me what I do at Patagonia, I usually say, oh, I run the numbers with the HR team, or oh, I'm in talent analytics. Even talent analytics is something that a lot of people don't have a whole lot of awareness to outside of our space. But a part of this whole process of kind of rethinking the way we name ourselves and name our work is coming from just this understanding that for some of the language around job titles, vice, senior manager, director, there's some power elements wrapped up in that have the opportunity to do more harm than good. They get in the way of getting work done and getting work done well, and they make our processes not as efficient, effective, or really democratic as we'd like them to be. So the running joke is, it may not affect my job title as some of that language isn't embedded in it, but still working on modeling the way we are trying to move towards everyone doing a better job of describing their work rather than describing their title as they introduce themselves.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. So here we are at this Economic Opportunity and Talent Analytics Summit, and we're talking about language, we're talking about describing our work, and even how you introduced yourself. It's really about making it approachable so you can actually help people and they understand what you're responsible for and what you can give back. So again, go a little bit deeper into that notion, because like you said, it affects behavior. It affects how people interact and regard one another. Is that right?
Yeah. What we found was that by relying on, again, this hierarchy element of title, things like decision-making became problematic. I need to go get my VP to approve this before that call can be made. I didn't have the opportunity to make the call about this until director was in front of my name. This kind of way of working can be really ineffective. We find that if we are using title to be the reason something happens, we're probably straying too far from the way the work needs to be done. So an example, if you have to be promoted into a director role in order to get buy-in from a room, even though you're the subject matter expert on that thing, we've lost something. So the way we're thinking about this language is, instead of being the director, comma, HR, director, comma, marketing, you're in marketing. And your ability to draw value in a conversation and add value to that conversation should be about that body of knowledge you bring to the table, rather than this word that happens to be in front of your name.
Yeah, absolutely love it. So it's also very clear on what that person can deliver to the organization, to the people in the room in that particular instance. And you all have done some work that's analogous to regenerative agriculture, where it's not only giving back internally, it's, how does it positively affect the broader community? Dean Carter and the panel just a little bit ago talked to that. So can you go and explain, how that aligns with this notion of language and job titles and so forth?
Yeah, I think the language link is really interesting. So we are working as a company on regenerative organic agriculture. But this philosophy around regenerating really applies not only to how we treat our land, but to how we treat our people internally and how we interface with our communities. So with our employee base, our philosophy of kind of regenerative HR, to borrow a Dean term, is really thinking about how do we ensure that anything we're asking people to do is bringing as much value into their life and into their existence as it is extracting or taking away. Is it important to set goals and drive performance only in that the company pulls something out of that person? Or can we reframe it and think about opportunities to drive performance in a way that brings something back into your life? And I think that's where we're getting some traction around this idea of, embedding the growth mindset in everything we do. Hopefully you're getting opportunities to grow and develop as a human by virtue of the work you're doing. We see that with the performance. The example that Dean raised earlier today around how we evaluated reframing our working schedule for several portions of our population, this 980 schedule. It wasn't just about, hey, did productivity slide? Did people slack off? No, it was, we were curious to see if having this different way of thinking about work added value to your life. Did you have better relationships with your family? Was it easier to schedule doctor's appointments? How did we, by virtue of doing this thing around your workday, add to your ability to function as a human holistically, rather than just focusing on, can we still get 80 hours of work out of you every pay period? Right. And that kind of translates well into how we work with our supply chain, which we don't own, and a huge, very important role of our business, we feel, is to be leaders in sustainability on the environmental side, on the people side. A lot of that effort coming out of actually not HR, but a different part of our company that's focused on things like fair trade certification for the manufacturing facilities we work with, ensuring that our people who are not our people, but by virtue of working with us, are our people, right, are getting paid well, treated fairly, and are having opportunities to sustain their lives.
Well, to pick up on one key theme that you just shared, and it's something that Dean Carter just shared again to reference that conversation, is a lot of the metrics that are very important in what you described likely don't exist in many organizations right now. I understand they had to be created. You had to go and ask people how they think and felt, and use those as something to move as a goal. You know, whether it be benefits, relationships, ability to schedule time with doctors. Can you speak about the need to innovate new measures that align with the culture that you want to create?
Yeah, I think that is key, and HR has taken, from my understanding, being a little younger in the game, seems native to me, but it's taken HR a while to even get to the point of having consistent metrics on what we are measuring, to have that be something we can compare across organizations, compare over time within organization. To do this kind of work, it is, again, going to take some creativity and innovation to think through how we assess what is important when we think about opportunity, sustainability, mobility, and create basically a safe space for us all to talk about this. Something we're paying attention to, again, in that specific example, looking at the quality of life people are experiencing outside. A lot of psychology research has focused on this. Yeah. The IO space in particular, a lot of people working a lot of academic years on understanding this, but embedding that within the organization and having that be a point of conversation, a little bit newer of a way of thinking about that work. In addition to thinking about relationship quality with your spouse as a result of having an extra day off work, we're thinking about more broadly with initiatives, how do we think about mobility? How do we calculate mobility in a way that's capturing the kind of movement that is A, available in an organization like ours, and B, important to us from a values perspective, and also align with some of our organizational goals. So we do some work with what we call an employee development program, which gives sort of shorter-term gigs to people who may have a skill set that's not directly tied to the work they're doing as an opportunity for you to develop and work in a different part of the business. Your time, your hours can be borrowed and used on a different product. And one of the things that we're curious about and our HR leadership's thinking about is how often do we convert people who do these development opportunities into new and different work? Does that create a pathway for mobility through the organization? And if you're not kind of attending to that, it's really hard to make a case, especially if you need to make a business case or an ROI case for it. If you're not measuring it, it's a little bit hard to do that. Right. So that's something that we're thinking about too. ROI not necessarily being a priority for us, but really that human element being more important. How do we show that we're adding value to people's lives by helping them craft a career at Patagonia that allows them to bring their whole self to work, use skills that they have that may not be totally tied to the work they're doing now, and feel like they're growing, progressing along their path?
Yeah, as you're talking, and I'm thinking about someone who might be listening to us right now, and you specifically, whether they be a business leader, CHRO, head of talent, or talent acquisition, or people analytics, it's like, well, Caitlin's talking about employee experience. Now she's talking about, talent account management. She's talking about employee branding. She's culture, all these themes. But you are taking a data perspective on it because data sheds insight into what's happening and what can happen if we nudge something. So you mentioned the 980.
980 work schedule.
So can you speak to that? Number one, why did it come about, and what have been some of the benefits? You alluded to a couple of benefits already.
Yeah, so it predates me. I got to only know Patagonia in a 980 world, but I think some of the interest was really around, again, rethinking how we work. We've always had a let my people go surfing culture. And, let my people go surfing culture works in some cases really well. If you surf and you live surfside, makes it really easy.
I'm a beach volleyball player, but I know you have a court there. So.
We actually have a volleyball net in the backyard too.
That's right.
But for some of the other things that our employees love to do that are truly connected to our core sport origins, it's a little harder to do that on a daily basis. So creating more space to access that world can happen when you rethink how you organize work hours. So that was, I think, a little bit of a motivation for that shift. But when you're then asking people to put in 9 hours a day for 8 days of a 10-day work period, there are some unintended consequences that you have to think about too, which is how does that influence on your day-to-day basis, your ability to get some of these things done? Is it harder on partners for one to be working now more hours a day than sort of a standard 8-hour workday? We wanted to think through all of that because this holistic experience requires that you're mindful not only of what happens in the working day, but outside of it. So we actually partnered with a researcher at CSU Channel Islands, and she was incredibly helpful in thinking through not only the research paradigm that was put into place, but how to really ask the questions to assess the experience that employees were having. And it was that data that really drove that, this is going to be okay for us. So when we then implemented it, did a little bit of testing after, that data showed that people were having better, more positive experiences in their after work life. They were able to get a little bit farther outside of the regional bubble on the weekends when they wanted to go explore and enjoy. And, in the way we've kind of communicated the benefits, it's really been focused on those things. You can have the time to go to the doctor. Let's make sure that you're not stressed out trying to make these two pieces of your life work together. Let's make it a little bit more seamless by just reorganizing how we think about the work.
So, I'm a fan, and I've been a fan. I'm obviously I will say this, again, to empathize with those who are listening today. Many people might be saying, oh, that's Patagonia. Patagonia is special, and it is. That being said, there are a lot of innovations and things that they can adopt. And let me just seed an idea here insofar as you are talking about employee experience. You're talking about how people think and feel. And in most organizations, those are in different functional silos within HR, sometimes outside of HR. Because it sounds like you're doing, for lack of a better term, work strategy or employee experience, whatever the term that an organization might be using. But there's a lot of tentacles to that. There's a lot of people involved. So the unappealing word, yet I don't have something that replaces it, is governance and collaboration. How do you bring people together? So, hey, we're going to do this 9 work schedule. I imagine that would kind of freak people out. Then you have a host of learnings that you're gaining, and I'm sure you involve many stakeholder groups, whether they be recruiting, compensation. Can you speak to that, how you bring people together around this? Yeah,
I think, again, we're in a bit of a nice position in that all of those teams are sitting in the same workspace already. So you can kind of shout across the room. For organizations that aren't operating that way, there's nothing to stop you from building those relationships now. And if you have a governance structure that is getting in the way, there's nothing to stop you from challenging that structure and trying to help the organization understand the benefit of bringing these streams of information or these decision makers together to think about the employees. The good news is I feel like a lot of the companies we're talking to and having conversations with here at this conference are already doing a lot of this work. Yeah. They have the space where they can have these conversations, and data becomes a common language that unites them. Mm-hmm. So the operations people can understand things like hours and scheduling quite well. Mm-hmm. So can your HR partners. Your IT folks understand data volume quite well. So do your data analytics folks. It's not such a stretch to work together cross-functionally, I think. And maybe it starts with small pieces. Mm-hmm. 980s may not be the starting point for any company, but there's got to be something that's aligned with your values, aligned with your goals, where bringing data about people to that conversation and just adding in this lens of it would also benefit our people probably is also beneficial to the business strategy. Yep. I'm loath to believe there's no business that can't benefit from doing more for its people. Mm-hmm. Especially with how expensive we are to maintain. Yeah. So it's about finding what that conversation needs to look like. Dean being a huge champion for our work and being well respected in our organization does help us get a seat at these tables, but he wouldn't push anything through that he didn't already have a good sense of buy-in from our product leaders, our sales leaders, our materials leaders, our innovation leaders. Mm-hmm. He's having those conversations, and I think one of the reasons he's able to have them is because he's been able to demonstrate that these changes help them too. Yep. It's not counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. It's in line with the goals. And
it's one thing, and it's said a lot, just go talk with them. And everyone's super busy. Mm-hmm. And you all, correct me if I'm wrong, roughly 3,000 people. The turnover, I understand, is very low as well. So it's the case where, okay, yeah, you might be able to walk across the hall, but many organizations don't have that ability given mm-hmm. geographical dispersion, size, and all that. But it's not that they can't do it. Sometimes there's an unwillingness to do it. So the question is this. Do you have a formal meeting rhythm with Dean and these other stakeholder groups, whether it be once a month, once a quarter, to talk about these challenges and opportunities? Or is it something on an as-need basis that, okay, I see this need emerging, let's get together on this particular topic? What does that look like?
It's a combination of both. We've gone through phases of having more formalized cadences in place. We've gone through phases where it's a lot more fluid. Once a month, our entire HR community does get together, kind of campfire style, mm-hmm. talk about what's going on in our work streams, mm-hmm. talk about what's going on in the business at large, get a little bit more insight into what other leaders are thinking about and strategizing on, and then have an opportunity to ask questions that Dean can take back to these leaders. So there is one process like that. When it comes to individual work streams, there are several key partners I work with that we sit down once a week, once every other week, and use it as a touch base to figure out what's coming down your pipeline that I can support. What do I need from you that may be kind of on my radar a few weeks, months out? And then a lot of the rest of it is truly more of a free-flowing workflow. Being able to set up time on someone's calendar and say, hey, I've got this idea. I'm not sure where it's going to go yet, but I want to run it by you. That's something where having a relationship in place makes that easier. So sometimes that formal structure can help you get to a place where you can use that informal communication more readily. Yeah. But we've kind of used a little bit of both over time, depending on what's needed for the project or the situation.
Well, just own my own bias. I love that. I love it for a variety of reasons, and I love it on behalf of any organization that might be listening or might be exploring the challenge around why people analytics hasn't stuck at my organization. Is what I heard there is that you have a forum by which to slow down and truly listen to your internal customers, if we can call them that, mm-hmm. their needs, their concerns, and plan your work so you can plug in. Whereas most organizations, I would say, and this is a bit of sadness when I say it, are, okay, I need this report, and you had 20 minutes on the agenda, now it's 10, mm-hmm. and da-da-da-da, and boom, and you're out. And it's like, hey, is that project done? Do we have this dashboard? So it gets kind of diminished. It's not in context. And so what I hear is that you'll just slow down a little bit, do a lot of listening, so when you put together your project and put it forth, that they understand the connective tissue as to why it's a priority. Is that a fair summary?
On its best days, it looks like that.
Everything's perfect.
We, like anyone, still have moments where there's that, hey, can you pull this? Also, I might need it in 20 minutes. What is that going to look like? Yeah. And I think getting to be in a space where our team is still building out a lot of this work, we can be a little bit more strategic. That's a luxury I know not everybody has. Yeah. And I'm thankful for that opportunity to be a little bit more strategic. It is in part because we do slow down sometimes. There are pros and cons to that. Sometimes when you're slow, you can overthink things and nitpick and really pick apart and challenge and criticize. And then it's, oh, well, if I'm not going to do it perfectly, why do it? Yeah. That's sometimes, I think, the trap we can fall into. And what I love from working with and talking to other organizations who are maybe on the hot seat more often is, how do I bring a little bit of speed, a little bit of decisiveness to that conversation, so that we aren't doing as much of the slow back and forth. Leave it there when it's helpful and proactive. Yeah. But I think truly a blend of both approaches is necessary.
Sure. And we've been talking certainly about the strategic stuff, and that is arguably the stuff that's going to impact your culture and a variety of other things that have a lot of visibility. What also has visibility, you all are B Corp, you have certain compliance reporting as a result of that. And without going deep into specifics right now, obviously, reporting is part of your job. And so, but that can also be a massive distraction insofar as I'm not able to do that strategic stuff because I'm doing this. So can you talk about your prioritization, how you manage that? And I see you smiling. I was like, yeah, okay, do we really have to talk about this?
Drinking from the firehouse.
There's a real question in there, is that there has to be visibility into the nature of the work and how much is involved to do it. And I don't think many HR leaders or those who are standing up, people analytics teams or capabilities, understand the real work that's involved. So can you speak to just how you see that world?
Yeah. Again, a little lucky. The reporting stuff for B Corp is a priority for my work. And that's clear because our values align with making sure that we are sharing where we're falling short and where we're really standing tall in a process like a B Corp audit. So even though it is reporting and it's not the really sexy, interesting analytic stuff sometimes, that's given strategic priority because it is a huge piece of how our company's chosen to operate.
And just so everybody knows, I skipped over it, a B Corp is a public benefit corporation. So,
and it's something that we encourage all companies to think through and look at. Hold yourselves accountable to these things that we may say we value, but are we really living on them? And that's something that we're really big on, is we want to live it, not just say we're doing it. So for that reason, something like B Corp reporting or these other reporting style projects that have to do with, are we living the values we say we're living, are important for us. Kind of to your point about, I forget where you were going with this one, but organizing the work and thinking about that strategy piece, it does sometimes mean that things that would otherwise probably be the more strategic element kind of get put to the side or picked up and set down at various points in time.
Yeah. And as we start to wrap up and put a bow on this, if we can, is you have had some language. We started this discussion with language, and it's around bringing the whole self to work and creating the safe place. You mentioned growth mindset. So as you move forward, what are some of the innovations that you would like to see happen? We're talking in a year's time, 2 years' time. Can you just, where are you going with your work?
Yeah. So I'm fortunate to be a piece of a great talent team. As an IO, I have passions that aren't just in the data, but the data can help inform a lot of what we think about learning and development, talent management, career planning, performance management. And I think one of the cool things that I'm seeing, and I think the measurement behind this is going to be really fascinating, this idea of next generation or next generation performance management, teaming, collaborative work, functioning in a more agile team format. All of that has interesting implications, period. But when we transport that to our organization, we get really excited about these interesting implications because coming from this growth mindset perspective, what does my future as an employee look like becomes a really different question when you're no longer focusing on the title hierarchy and the language around that and really dialing it into what work do I want to do next? What impact do I want to make next? So how do we think about getting people opportunities to do their next? how do we think about assessing whether or not that's working? How do we organize people and works? How do we break work into gigs and think about letting people do a little bit more flexible work? In that, I mean, they may own little pieces of different bundles of what we would normally have called one job.
Yeah.
All of that's a really interesting analytics challenge.
Absolutely.
And I don't have an answer yet. It's going to be something that I'm learning much as the rest of us are. How do we assess what good looks like on that? How do we even keep up with the volumes of data that could be generated from these processes where, if you're reteaming multiple times in a year or working on really disparate pieces of work, how do we understand how you're showing up in all those spaces? I think there's a lot of interest around network analysis and understanding from that network perspective what work looks like. To do things like understand collaborative overload, or how do we assess diversity and inclusion when we're thinking about networks and whose network looks like what because of what factor. All of that is something that I think we really would love to get to tomorrow as a company and as an analytics group. And you kind of have to walk before you run a little bit. But the work is moving there pretty fast. So getting kind of on board and sprinting alongside your bike is kind of how we're running some days.
Well, you bring this up, and again, I'm putting my own layer of language on top of what you're saying. You are really involved in formulating work strategy. So how work is getting done, which historically was not the domain of HR, certainly not HR analytics. You had operations and even IT influencing that, but you're consciously creating the work experience, the work strategy, and I'm sure you're accounting for disruptions like automation, robotic automation, AI, and all that stuff. Is that a fair statement as well?
I would say the strategery, if you will, around some of those elements isn't falling in my space, but by virtue of being involved in those conversations, I can at least take it into account and provide insider feedback. Again, the perk of sitting within a talent team that's owning a lot of these pieces within HR is that I'm one step removed from that process rather than hearing about it by proxy. I'm in some of those conversations. It's what we talk about at lunch.
And then just having to deal with it. And it's like, where did that come from?
Then it's like, hey, how would we measure that? Well, let me ponder it and get back to you. We'll think of something here. Maybe go talk to a couple of other people. But that's the benefit of being pretty closely linked and working in a much more cross-functional fashion.
So if I'm a business executive, CHRO, head of talent, what have you, I sense it would be great to go to you and say, hey, Caitlin, here's my challenge. Here's what I'd like to learn more about. What are the arrays of ways that you can get at this, as opposed to, hey, I have this diversity challenge, give me, my diversity metrics right now, and because that might be of marginal value. Is that, can you talk to that?
I don't think I've ever spoken to someone in analytics who would not prefer to be approached with the question in that fashion. If you come to an analytics professional, especially in the people space, where a lot of folks, in addition to being masters at manipulating data sets, also have a good understanding of the people side of this framework. They would much rather hear, hey, there's a funny thing happening, I'm curious. And they can then help that business leader put in place some working hypotheses, some ways you might assess that. Partnership like that will go so much farther than if you come and say, like, give me the numbers. I need to know what this number looks like. Because a lot of times what I've found, and I think what anyone in this space would tell you, is you're asking for the wrong number to answer the question behind your question. So come to us with your question, not what you think the answer is, and we'll help you figure out if that's the right number to answer your question.
And to our earlier discussion, we might not have the right data. We might have to go and create it. We might have to go find it. And there might be an array of analytical techniques that we can apply or tools that can help get at that. But if we're just going after that. So, thank you for your answer. So any concluding remarks as we start to wrap up, or as we wrap up?
I think it's a really cool time to be in this space. I, again, feel pretty lucky to be doing it here. If there's one thing that I'm taking away from our conversations at this conference, everyone's got to keep learning and pushing, and failure may be really inherent in that. So creating that kind of safe space in an analytics world, in any work that anyone is doing, seems to be key to making that happen. I love hearing from every analyst I talk to how many things they tried and failed before they got the thing right. Whether it's trying to implement a new metric, trying to run an analysis with a complicated data set, trying to answer a question that they thought should have been really simple. That failure story, I think, is really important to share and to communicate and talk about, because we can't advance any of this stuff unless we put forth something and see if it works. And understanding it may fail 90% of the time, we'll get to the 10% that works to answer these bigger people questions.
Yeah. Caitlin, you rock.
Oh, thank
Appreciate you.